Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to the webinar today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. Now, this webinar will be recorded. If you would like to ask a question, then please use the Q&A function and the speakers will get back to you during the question and answer section at the end of the webinar. Your camera and microphone have been disabled, but please use the raise hand function if you prefer to ask your question verbally. Also, the webinar is automatically captioned. If you would like to view the captions, then please click on the CC function in Zoom. So thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar, which will be focusing on how we can increase the impact of EU-funded projects through accessibility. Now, the main objectives of today's session are to explain what accessibility is and why it is relevant to EU-funded projects. We also want to highlight how accessibility can increase the impact of your project and its results. And finally, explain how accessibility can be included at different stages throughout the life cycle of a project. Now, we know that it's impossible to cover everything about accessibility in EU projects in a 45-minute time slot. However, we do want to provide you with practical tips and ideas that you can take away from the session and start implementing in your projects from today, helping to ensure that your project is accessible to all. My name is Jon Switters, and I am a European project manager at Funka. And I have been working in consultancy and EU project management for over 15 years now. Now, I'm pleased to say that today I am in very good company, as I will be joined by my colleague, Sara, who is a research strategist at Funka. And Sara has a wealth of experience in EU-funded research and innovation projects in the field of accessibility. So I'll now hand over to Sara, who will kick off the webinar by talking about what is accessibility. So take it away, Sara.
Thank you very much. So if you can forward to the next slide. Accessibility is in its essence about making products and services that can be used by everyone, regardless of ability. And the main idea here is also that if we create products and services that can help people with the greatest challenges, we also at the same time improve all the products and services to make them better for everyone. So accessibility at its core is a human-centered design. So it departs from the users and their various needs. And it's about taking into account and making space for flexibility for different needs, whether or not you have a disability or whether or not the user is in a particular situation, or where it can be useful to have a bit more help. So a person without a disability that is, for example, in a very stressful situation can face the same challenges as a person with disabilities. And this is why accessibility is also helpful for everyone. Next slide, please. John, can you move forward? So how can accessibility increase the impact of your project? What does it have to do with EU projects? So in fact, it's all about impact. It's all about making an impression and making sure that research and innovation results do not stay on the shelf. And this is really what it's at the core of making an impact when you talk about EU-funded projects. So with accessibility, you have results that are easier to understand and relate to. So you can create an interest among a wider audience. And this automatically leads also to an increased willingness to use or to buy the product or service among wider audience that you perhaps didn't initially think of. And this in turn makes a positive impact on society as it works towards inclusion and greater participation for all. So the key to success is really to have a product, service, a result, and innovation that everyone can use and relate to. And also in the end that you can communicate on the innovation in a way that everyone can understand and relate to. So then you will have more users and a higher impact. And this can be done in various ways. So we have to do it throughout the whole life cycle of the project. And this is what we come to next. Accessibility is not something that you can just add in the end, but you really need to integrate it into the whole thinking of the project. So it starts from the beginning with setting up inclusive requirements so that you have the user in mind and users of all abilities and of all walks of life. And then throughout the whole project, to make sure that the users can actually access and understand the product or service, you need to test it with users throughout. And at the end, also, you need to make sure that the communication and dissemination about the product and service is accessible. And in the next moments, we will also look now at the practical tips on how you can do it at each stage of the project lifecycle, starting at the next slide now with tips and requirements. So accessibility may sound difficult, and if you start looking at it, there is lots of different paragraphs and can look daunting, but really the principle of making everything usable for everyone is quite simple as an idea. So you can start with getting familiar with principles of universal design. And universal design basically means to make a product or service as usable as possible to the greatest extent from the beginning to the largest groups of users without having to make adaptations or special solutions later on. So if you think of a wide user group from the beginning, you will have a result that is more intuitive, easier to understand for the user, and also flexible, that takes into account different ways of working with the product and interacting with the service. And this will in turn lead to a greater user experience and also an innovation potential. So thinking about accessibility and the various kinds of users from the beginning can also lead to different ways of using the product in the end. And this is really the essence of innovation. And one example of this is responsible design that is now integrated in every small screen we have, but that was originally developed for accessibility reasons. Basically, it's about being able to resize text on different screens. And this was originally developed with low vision users in mind to be able to enlarge parts of the screen without losing the content and the context. And that has now been applied in all smartphones and tablets and every screen that we use every day now, persons from all walks of life. And then the next step in the life cycle is involving users. So it's completely impossible for any developer or any designer to really think about what happens when a user gets to know the project or product without really testing it. And the key tip here is really to start early on in the process. So you don't start off with a concept and develop a design idea and then later on realize that, oh no, this doesn't work for the users. So starting already at the concept stage with the very first designs to test them all with different user groups. And it's better to do a small scale test than to say, oh, this is too difficult, I will not do it at all. And another key thing with user tests is that you have to make room for iterations. So to test and test again, because you will need them. And it's always when you work with users, they will notice things that you don't. And there has to be room for improvements throughout the process. One example we have of this, the illustration is a staircase where I have a very small, cute little child looking at this huge staircase, wondering how on earth he's going to be able to get to the top, because basically the steps are too big for him. And this is an example of what happens if you don't involve the users in the beginning. Then perhaps you've made this magnificent staircase, and it's in marble and everything is very fancy. But for the user, it doesn't matter how it looks like because it's impossible to use. And now we come on in the life cycle to the communication and dissemination. So then I will hand on to Jon for this session.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. And as you were just saying, another area of the project lifecycle where accessibility is key is in the way you communicate about your project, package, and disseminate the results. Now, dissemination and communication activities are often obligatory in EU-funded projects and usually have an entire work package or a set of tasks dedicated to them. And activities usually begin with communication about the project, its existence, its objectives, for example. Then, as the project progresses, the focus moves on to the dissemination of the project results. But accessibility should be taken into account throughout this process. So, this includes, within this group of accessible communication and dissemination, this includes keeping accessibility in mind when we are developing project deliverables, such as reports, studies, policy briefs. And we have to think, are these documents being developed in the project? Are they accessible to everybody? We should also think about accessibility when we use specific communication and dissemination channels to spread these results to our audience. For example, is our project website accessible to all users? Can the content we produce for social media be consumed by all? And are the events we organize during the project, such as conferences, workshops, training sessions, for example, easily accessible by all attendees? Project deliverables often present the results of the work being carried out and may come in the form of policy recommendations, a gap analysis, a research article, etc. There are many different types. However, no matter the content of the deliverable, it should be accessible to all. And whilst we're aware that there are other types of deliverables, such as mobile applications, databases, training courses, today we will focus on perhaps the most common form, which are deliverables in Word. So how can we increase the accessibility of your project deliverables in Word? Firstly, use unjustified text. Now, as you can see in the image on the right, this is when the text is not aligned to both the left and the right margins. Now, by using unjustified text, it enhances the readability of the document and lets the text flow in a natural way. And that justified text is usually harder to read and follow, as the uneven spacing between the words can cause the words to be spaced further apart, making it difficult for readers to locate word boundaries, for example. Secondly, make sure you use sufficient line spacing. Now, it may be difficult to track text where the lines are close together, especially for visually impaired, some cognitive impaired users, people with reading and writing difficulties, and/or dyslexia. Now, providing extra space between lines and paragraphs allows users to better track the next line and to recognize when the end of a paragraph is reached. Thirdly, ensure that you have included alternative text or alt text for your images. Now, alt text is the description that can be included by right-clicking on the image. And it's extremely important for users with screen readers in order to provide context to the image that accompanies the text. And it all has to do with purpose and meaning. Why did you choose this image? What do you want it to reveal to the reader? Now, just a quick tip here, you don't need to include the words picture of or image of in the alt text, as screen readers automatically tell the user that this is an image. However, if an image is merely decorative and provides no additional context for the reader, this can be marked as decorative. Next, use tables in your document only when it's necessary to convey relationships between pieces of data. Tables shouldn't be used for layout purposes, for example. And I'm sure the project managers among us, we've all used a table for the front page of our deliverable at some point with the name of the project, the work package, etc. However, this can really complicate things for some readers. When using a table in Word, keep it as simple as possible. Ensure you designate a header row and use column headings, and that the column headings are repeated on each page that the table appears on. You should also add an alt text to describe the contents of the table for those using screen readers. Finally, you can use the Word accessibility checker to get an overview of the major accessibility problems that there may be in your document. Now, although this will not show every single accessibility problem or provide lots of detail, it will give you a good start. Now, this can be found within the document under Tools in Check Accessibility. So now we've had a look at how we can make the project results more accessible. Let's have a look at the channels where we share these results and what we can do here to ensure that they reach the widest audience possible. So firstly, let's have a look at project websites. More often than not, we create a project website during the initial phases. However, when looking for the web designer, how often is accessibility in the specifications that you ask for? Now, accessibility needs to be taken into account at the very beginning, before the website is created, as remediation after the website is developed and running is much more timely and costly. Now, try and make it a requirement when choosing the designers of your project website. However, if you have your project, if you're watching this webinar and you have your project website already up and running, but you would like to make it more accessible, there are also a number of very simple checks that you can carry out and a multitude of free resources available. One example of these is the color contrast tool. The color contrast checker, which will ensure that there's sufficient contrast on different elements on your website, something which is key for low visibility users. And an example of good and bad color contrast combinations can be seen in the example on the right-hand side of the screen. There are also more comprehensive tools available that can highlight accessibility issues on your website, such as the WAVE Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. However, we don't have time to go through them all today, but please do reach out to us and we can share them with you. The next part of this channel package that we're going through today is social media. Now, social media and the use of Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and I'm sure very soon TikTok, to disseminate project activities and results has now become a regular part of any EU project communication and dissemination strategy. However, we need to ensure that the content we are creating is accessible for as many users as possible. So what can we do? Again, add alternative text when using images. We've already discussed this for written reports, the deliverables, but there is also an option to add alternative text to images on channels such as Twitter and LinkedIn. So please use it. Secondly, if we're sharing videos, ensure that the video content has captions. Now, this can help deaf or hard of hearing users to watch the content. And it can also help people who may be watching a video that perhaps isn't in their mother tongue, or those who are watching the content in a very noisy environment, for example. Next, when you write your hashtags, when you use hashtags to mark the keywords, for example, in a tweet, please write them in camel case so that they can be correctly read out by screen readers. Now, camel case is when each new word starts with a capital letter, just like the example we've included on the screen in this slide. Next, use emojis sparingly. We all like to use emojis, but they can get in the way of the message that you are trying to convey. And this can be a particular problem for people using screen readers, where the emoji name is read out loud before the rest of the message. So as we move on to kind of the final channel that we are going to talk about today, and that is events. So whilst the COVID-19 pandemic has made meeting in groups very difficult, face-to-face events still remain an essential and effective way of carrying out dissemination and outreach activities for EU projects. So in order to make these events more accessible, there are some questions to think about. So how do you make sure that participants are able to reach the event? Well, now we can do this by providing directions in an accessible manner. And we mean this by both the content that's provided and the format in which it's distributed. We can also ensure accessibility in the approach to the venue, for example, make sure that there aren't any physical obstacles in the way. And we can also provide clear indications within the event to the different sessions, different rooms that are taking place. Next, how do you make the event room or location accessible? Now, you can take into account things such as furniture placement, for example, ensure that the visually and hearing impaired participants get to choose where to sit, and the front is usually a good place. Look at the lighting. It should be bright and even, but without causing too much glare. Ensure that the acoustics are good. Now, this is good for all participants, but of course, especially for the hearing and visually impaired. How do we ensure that our communication during the event is inclusive? So, for example, in a training situation, always address participants with their name. For visually impaired participants, this is the way that they will know that you're talking to them and not directly to somebody else. And finally here, use registration forms to collect specific accessibility requirements prior to the event so that you can prepare sufficiently. So to end this kind of highlights of ideas and practical tips for you to take into account in your EU project, we would like to leave you with a key message that we really wanted to transmit today. And that's that accessibility makes sure that EU project results are usable and attractive to all. So thank you very much for you all for listening in today. And please don't hesitate to ask us any questions you may have. And on that note, I think we'll head over to the question and answer box, as I can see that there are some coming in already. Sarah, I'm not sure you had a chance to look at these. If you want to kick off.
Yeah, let's see where we can start. One attendee is asking, do you have any tips on how to put together a diverse test group if you're not already cooperating with a provider such as Funka? Yeah, and this can be a bit tricky, of course, but I would say that one way is to reach out to different organizations, like disabled persons organizations, senior citizen organizations, and explain what you are doing and why. And perhaps through that means be able to get in touch with different types of groups. And if you're not sure of which groups to start with, another way to start your journey towards working with different user groups can also be to look at personas. And there are various sources on that on the web. I think perhaps we can put together a package with a few lists of practical tips on how to get started with users and different user needs. So we can provide that also.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That's great. We've had a couple more questions in the chat. One is, sorry, we have another one here that's just come in, and that is, can you tell us any tools to help check accessibility? I guess here you mean the accessibility of a website here. So as I mentioned in the presentation, one of them is the Wave tool, but we do have a list of other resources that we can share with you. So please reach out to us via email and we'll make sure that we can share those with you. Sarah, I'm not sure whether you have anything else to add there.
No, I think that's it. I mean, if you are starting out, the Wave tool is a pretty good start to just see how it works with accessibility. But one thing perhaps to mention with the automatic tools is that they will not pick up absolutely everything. So it's a good start, but it's a start for the journey. It doesn't really end there. So that's also something to keep in mind. It doesn't replace testing with users at all, for example.
Yeah, that's very, very good point. And I think we need to make that clear there. There's another question come in saying, this is really useful. If I would like to learn more, where can I turn? Is there an EU institution covering accessibility in research projects? What I would say is, if you would like to learn more, then please do reach out to us. And just to let you know that this will be part of a training program that we will go into more depth on different aspects of accessibility in EU projects, which will be available in the near future. So yeah, please just reach out to us for any kind of questions that you may have. Sarah, do you have anything else to add there? Any other?
Yeah, no, it's just the question of the EU institution is pretty interesting because it doesn't really cover accessibility in research projects, unfortunately. Hopefully now that there is so much happening on the EU stage with accessibility, both with the Web Accessibility Directive and the upcoming laws, hopefully there will be a push forward also that accessibility reaches out more to the research, because it's a huge amount of projects and products that are being financed by the EU. So it has a huge impact on society. And if we can get accessibility into this world as well in a much more positive way, then we can make a huge contribution to inclusion and participation in the digital world in the EU.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question just come in, and that's thanks for the webinar. Do you have a good example to share? By this, I imagine that you mean the person who's asked this question mean an example in real life. I think both Sarah and I work a great deal on EU project management, and it's something, particularly working on the communication and dissemination side of things, is something that we implement in our different projects that we take part in. Just for example, in one of the recent projects that we're working on, you will see that all of the communications that we do for the project are shared with the consortium in an accessible way. So they include the alt text already written out, so that the consortium just simply have to copy and paste the alt text when they're doing a tweet, for example. So we really just facilitate as much as possible from our side the accessibility in the projects in which we work. Sarah, I'm not sure if you have any other examples that you would like to share.
I was thinking about also the other parts of the project lifecycle, perhaps starting with requirements. In one of the larger pilot projects that is running now on digital health and elderly in Europe, we also went through all the user requirements and checked them towards the universal design principles to see which parts of the solutions would be helpful to also take into account the principles of universal design. And starting with the requirements, that has then been put forward throughout the later stages of development towards the technical requirements and the validation of the platform. So really starting with, it's a huge project. So it's going to be extremely difficult to apply accessibility and the full package in every part, but just starting with universal design principles in the requirements really will both make an impact on the results as such, and it also had a positive impact on the whole ambiance of development, and can really see that other partners in the project are happy about getting a new way to reflect and look on the results and what we are developing. So it's been a really interesting journey in that project.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sarah. And it's good to look at this, as you said, the examples from different parts of the project life cycle. So yeah, thank you for adding that side of things. We have another question, which is, what if my project is only covering one target audience? Do you suggest to make the results accessible to all anyway? I think the answer here is yes. Accessibility, is beneficial to everybody, not just one specific group. It's beneficial for everybody. So I would say yes, include the tips that we mentioned today, and try and make your results as accessible to all the audiences as much as possible. Sarah, I'm not sure if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, well, this is also the link to innovation and to be able to use your project as widely as possible, because, okay, you have thought about one target audience, but perhaps there will be others interested in your product that you didn't think of. So it's always better to improve for as wide as audience as possible, because you never know where your product or service will end up.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Sorry, the questions are coming in thick and fast now. I'm just trying to keep up with them. We have a question about teaching materials for primary and secondary schools and accessibility. I understand that these are outside of the current media legislation, but may be wrong. Are there plans for such materials to be accessible? Sarah, do you have any input there?
It's tricky with the legislation because this is a bit different in different countries as well. I don't think neither Jon and I are particular experts on the various interpretations of the general legislation in each and every country. But there is, the way I see, if I can just make a personal interpretation of the legislation, is that this is a start, and it's been a negotiation to be able to at least have this to have the Web Accessibility Directive and the legislation. And we would hope that by putting also the sort of spotlight on the different authorities will also then have knock-on effects further on in the system. So I'm not aware of any particular initiatives that is directed towards the schools and the broader scale at the moment. But as more and more people get to talk about it, we can also help to influence the directions of the general sort of legislation. Then there is the whole discussion about, is legislation really the best way forward, or should we just make awareness raising? And I think we can go on with another webinar on that discussion.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you made a good point there, knowing just from the context of the question, we don't know which country that's in at the moment. So if the person who launched that question wanted to reach out to us, that also we can have a look at your question, maybe just in a little bit more detail, just knowing a bit more of the context. But thank you for that. We then have another question saying, can we have this cut and paste text for our proposal, at least for projects that deal with theoretical research that are unlikely to go beyond website and Twitter, and maybe a couple of talks? So I would just say to this question, it's not, I don't think it's kind of a cut and paste issue. As you will have seen, accessibility needs to be included kind of throughout the project in all different aspects. So it's very, I don't think it can be solved by just kind of cutting and pasting a paragraph in the project proposal. But I think kind of using the tools that we've given you today, and also having a think about where accessibility can be included and written about in your proposal would be a much more beneficial way of doing it. However, do reach out to us if you have any specific questions. As I said, we left the address on the next page, so you can get in touch with us at research@funkacom.com, And also, you know, Funka is also very keen on participating in project proposals, and we can be the accessibility partner. So if you need any help, then please just reach out to us. Yeah, so another question coming in is, in my experience, the biggest problem challenge in EU projects outreach is the different languages of the member states. How do you make sure all corners of the union get to know about your project results? That is a very tough question. And I think it depends on the project you're working with and where you are and the resources that you actually have with regards to language, because in the projects where we work with various partners, we obviously tap into the resources of the partners to translate the results into as many languages as possible. But this obviously has its limitations according to the budget available. But obviously, if your project has a specific target group of countries, then that's easier. But yeah, trying to get to all of the countries in Europe is tough, and I think it's one of the current challenges for all EU projects. Sarah, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add on to that.
Well, I'm thinking perhaps also in terms of multimodality, so that language is one thing, but perhaps the communication can also be supplemented by visuals. Okay, it does not really work for all audiences, but it's a way that is language neutral to also complement your communication. So perhaps thinking in a bit more creative ways. And as you say, perhaps not all projects are relevant for exactly all the countries. My usual standard sort of answer to these things is to, okay, this looks daunting. How am I going to take care of everyone? There's so many users, so many languages and everything. And the risk is that you just don't do anything, but just to start small and start with the tools that you have at hand. I have been in contact with public authorities saying that, oh, it's so difficult to text. We don't like to text things because it's difficult and we don't know. And then I said, well, you have this automatic tool. Okay, but it looks ugly. Yeah, but if it's a choice between ugly and not giving the information, at least it should be accessible so that everybody has access to the information at its basis. Just to start with what you have and to make it accessible where you are, and then to build on it something more. That would be my way into this.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I'm just looking, if we don't have any more questions, then I think we can close the session. I would just like to say thank you all very much for attending today. And as we said, if you do have any questions or something should occur to you after the webinar, then please just reach out to us and we will respond accordingly. So thank you very much and have a lovely weekend.